Wow, I'm super excited to be here, and I'm stoked to talk about this subject. But I'm completely biased. I'm a UX prototyper at EditorX, so from what I do, I know from firsthand how powerful coding is, and also how no code can give you tremendous velocity. So I think what will be interesting for you guys who are watching is that we have these amazing people here from different perspectives to talk about it. So I feel like we have our own kind of private justice league of people to talk with and hear their insights. So guys, let's do a very quick introduction and we'll dive right into it. So let's start with you, Catherine.
Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine. As mentioned, I'm currently the director of products at Stash, which is a fintech company based in New York City. I've been a product manager for about 7 years. And the way I interact with low code, no code stuff now is through some tools we use, tools that we maintain for our product marketing team, and we also use in-house in product.
Awesome. Thank you very much. David, let's go to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. So I'm David. I'm Director of Design at Webflow. I lead product design, user research, and also brand design in the interim. My no-code background has been kind of just how I kind of got up in the ranks of getting into design and prototyping all of back in the days of HyperCard and Dreamweaver. And Guy, I'm sure you can appreciate this. It's kind of meta now to kind of design a design tool for designers and really kind of think about that space. So that's where I've been spending my energy.
For sure. And also, you already won the most design room out of everyone. It's already way cooler than my settings. And last but certainly not least, Dana.
Hi, Dana, VP of Engineering and Partnerships at GitHub. I don't do any low code, no code. I just do all code. And so being the home for all developers and thinking about open source, we just see this as, you know, the next generation of makers and builders to produce and innovate. And so very passionate about the subject. And yes, David wins for the coolest background. I went totally sterile.
I'm with you, the same here. Thank you, Dana. Okay, so let's just dive into it. And guys, if you have any thoughts and comments and questions, people watching us, you can write in the chat. I think no code and low code, I'm gonna call it no code from now, just for brevity. It's like a really big term. So I really wanna kind of make it more down to earth. So how do you define it? So Dana, let's continue with you. How would you define no code?
I mean, no code is really an abstraction of the programming language built in a modular way so that people without a traditional background in computer science or coding can build applications. So really, I like to think of building blocks of the whole system, you know, as a full stack. And typically they're demonstrated in a graphical interface to make it just really, really simple to use. Not all of them, it depends on the platform, but you know, I think the simplest way is just really a building block abstraction of code to build applications.
Yeah, I really agree with that kind of statement. And I want to hear what David has to say. What's your take on it as a design person?
Yeah, I think I agree with that too. Often people associate no code as anti-code, and I think that's not true at all, right? It's just different means and pathways to get there. So, you know, when I was a designer, I loved using code, so I'm not anti-code. It's just different means to be able to get the job done, and just kind of plus one, how Dana articulates, really about the abstraction. So, you know, the thing I would add is like, no code for me is not needing to know kind of the mental models or learning how to code, but still have the power and access to it through that graphical interface.
Yeah, so I feel that power is getting more and more powerful and appealing. And I want to ask you, I feel like we have for a while no code and low code, but it's getting like more kind of prevalent and more big. So what do you think makes this kind of growth in this area? Or maybe more specifically, do you feel like more people want to get into building things, or more people who build things want a greater velocity doing it?
Yeah, I think for me, it's more people wanting to build things, and it's really about having the different pathways of where people start. I've heard people who use Webflow or they've used Wix and other tools and say, hey, I actually learned how to code from this, right? So I think it's starting from that intention of like, I want to create something, I want to be able to express something on the web, and now it's just more of different pathways to get there.
Okay, and Catherine, I also want to ask you about this. And do you feel like it's something that the main appeal is, like David said, is the power that it gives me, or also the way for me to kind of get into understanding coding better and also using that as a tool?
Yeah, I think those are two sides of this of the same coin. So definitely because you want to be empowered to do things yourself, or maybe try something that's out of your current programming skill set. But when I also think of no code, I also think of the children's games that are just building blocks essentially to teach you how to code. And adults like that too. There's all these no code games you can find on the internet to teach you the fundamentals of Python or Ruby. I think a lot of times in professional settings, people come for the DIY, I don't have to bug an engineer, I can own this myself. And they end up staying and growing with the tool, and maybe even outgrowing the tool because of the learning opportunities and the learn by doing that happens with them.
Okay, so I hear that you're saying that it is something appealing, and then also, like you're saying, I can do stuff on my own and I don't need someone else. Are there any other, especially from your perspective, when using those tools in a product process, what are more benefits that you think of when you think no code?
Sure. So in specific product building, obviously the speed at which you can get something out, the resource saving, and to me, the most important is usually you can utilize these tools and get something out there without needing to deploy. So you're not tied to your current deploy schedule. You don't need to incur the risks of having a deploy go out. So it frees up not only your engineering time, but potentially your DevOps time or your security team time. And it lets you operate in a schedule that isn't tied to maybe other players at your company.
That's interesting. So Dana, you hear what Catherine is saying, and how do you see it as someone from the other side of the spectrum as a developer? Do you feel also you have benefits that as a developer you agree with, or maybe not?
I think for the most part, developers, myself included, are inherently efficient. Some people may say lazy. I'm going to say we're efficient. The world's built on copy pasta. And to me, this is taking those rudimentary tasks, these pieces that you can just leave to this modularized way, because you're not going to utilize a platform for a really complex system where it's something that's so proprietary to your business. You may use pieces of it. You may use pieces for your business systems that support and enable that. And that's awesome. I think, depending upon what you need, you use the right tool. And the part for me is, there's this fear that as these systems mature and as the rise of artificial intelligence and machine learning, it's like, what about the curly bracket developer? I'm like, well, somebody still has to write that code. And being the most efficient developer, I think, hell yeah, let that happen, because I don't want to do that stuff over and over. I want to do the fun stuff. I want to do the creative stuff. I want to solve the problems where you have to really experiment. And so there's two really different types of business needs when you think about these platforms. And there's always going to be a level of skepticism. Like, that's just who we are as humans. It's like, what's this platform you're introducing, and can it really do what it wants? But you've seen the maturity of this happen over the years. I mean, because these systems have been around without the vernacular of no code, low code. Like, shocker, they've been around. Like, this isn't a new revolutionary thing. It's just better. It's just a better thing. And so from a developer experience, I think it's just going to really empower everybody, because it unlocks agency. And software development is a team sport, and it's so many people involved. There's a huge orchestration across the company, especially for a technology company, of how you deliver product. And I'm all about this, because we forget sometimes as engineers, like, oh yeah, there's a billing aspect. Oh yeah, there's probably a marketing aspect. Oh yeah, support aspect. Like, empower the whole life cycle.
Yeah, I just want to add, I think no code has been the most developer friendly innovation that's happened, right? And that's because, like, Dana, like, we're pro curly bracket developer, right? And let's be real, like, there's going to be things that are always going to be in the back of that Jira backlog that no one's ever going to get to. And now you're empowering teams to be able to get to that. So, like, curly bracket engineers, and developers can work on the fun stuff, right? Like I know there's so many engineers where, you know, you do the whiteboard interview and you're learning about ML and you're kind of testing for that. And then you start your job and they're like, here, center this button, or like, you know, fix these layout things. And by having no code, it helps kind of have developers really focus on some of the most complex problems. So I think it's one of the most like pro developer like technologies available.
Amazing. It's really happy to hear it from someone from the opposite side, also agreeing. I want to ask about maybe the flip side of it. Like you're saying, it's a way for people to do stuff in parallel to the developers. So what about like kind of terms like rogue ITs and stuff like that, people doing it on the side? What do you see the risks in those kind of things, and how do you maybe mitigate those kind of risks?
Yeah, I can jump in first here. So I mentioned before, you're able to operate outside of your normal deploy schedule, do stuff midday, intraday, if maybe you're a once a day shop. You might also miss the QA cycle when, you know, someone can in theory go off and do this by themselves. I do also think that because no code, low code is so well adopted at places, it can, and I'm thinking of instances where a company uses something that is no code, and then they move into a low code, where an engineer makes a custom template that a product marketer can use over and over again independently. What happens when that product marketer that got really good at it and finessing it the way they like leaves, right? You're kind of left with this gap where you now have this pseudo proprietary thing that isn't documented in a place like GitHub, and isn't documented in, you know, ideally it is in Confluence, but you can be really left with a gap in your system if you were using this critical custom piece for a while. Yeah, missing the QA cycle is a big one. And then there's also I
would, if I can interrupt that. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to ask about what you said. If there are any ways, or maybe from your experience, that you find solutions to kind of transform between the no code to the low code to the maybe full code.
Yeah. So I think, you know, I can give you an example of something that we've done over at Stash. We use a low code, no code marketing tool for in-app messaging. And we have some levels of customization, but we strive really hard to keep everything pretty straightforward. And we train up our product marketers in basic HTML, basic CSS, so they can do some stuff if they want. But we have they follow a QA cycle as well. And it's something we had to introduce into that, because originally they were doing their own thing. Why would I QA? I don't do that with other stuff. That's not part of my process. I'm not an engineer. I don't need to do that. So I think whenever you're moving from a no code to a low code situation, introducing other engineering principles into the process, the bare minimum being QA, the secondary being having some sort of documentation or some sort of README, so that others can kind of come in and understand what you've done and why you've done it that way. And then in terms of moving from low code to total code, I think that the best thing you can do is to acknowledge what you're doing and acknowledge you're no longer making a simple tool that everyone is going to be able to use. You have to acknowledge, all right, engineering is going to take this over. They're going to build it. They're going to maintain it. And it's not going to be this hybrid thing anymore.
So I see you talked about documenting what you do and kind of preparing stuff for handoff. And I see Dana nodding really wisely there. So
Yeah.
What do you think, Dana?
I mean, I'm going to tell you, I'm very biased to the engineering workflows. Like anything I do, even at home, I'm like, oh, here's the engineering process. Because all process is software waiting to be built, right? That's what a process is. So just like Catherine said, like, make sure you have the right level of process. And to me, it's applying that engineering mindset to a no-code, low-code platform as far as change management is concerned. Because you have to build this culture, and you want this culture where you empower people and you've made it very clear the constraints and the reasons. And you've also built in the guardrails, because we have this pressure on us to deliver and produce. And so sometimes that pressure can override going in and that stop and wait for a second, make sure you've dotted your I's and crossed your T's. It just happens, especially, this day and age when there is such an opportunity for innovation from everybody. That means it's a little bit more important for you to continue to produce. So we kind of mix that together. And so I think to echo that is like, just start building out. No code, low code is still an engineering process. You're building a digital asset. Use those principles, have change management, and then think about it in the right way. You maybe you don't have to do a full scale, like, sophisticated, like deployment pipeline, but you should still have the processes behind it that mimic it in the right places, because not only can you introduce security problems, bespoke solutions where it defeats the purpose of investing in one of these platforms. And then thirdly, your brand. I hate to say it, like some of the killers are like if you inadvertently produce something that is at odds because it's been rushed or it's sloppy, have every designer on your team yell at you. Trust me, they will. You should get yelled at. But I think it starts with really producing a culture that says, hey, citizen developer, this is how we develop. We document, we test, and we ensure and inform, but we move fast. And I think you have to set those principles, throughout the company, because if you're taking these tools and you're making the ability to create in a more community fashion, then you're going to be following those principles. Like, seriously, like congratulations, you're a developer. Now this is what developers do. That's how you just have to approach it, in my opinion.
I love it.
Confirm. I was going to say, I can confirm designers will yell at you and say, like, kind of talk about the experience consistency. I agree with what Dana and Catherine said. Just kind of wanted to add the lens that I think, when you think about user experience, I think trust is the most important thing. And if you're not thoughtful about change management and scale, that's where trust can be broken, right? So if you're daisy chaining a bunch of different no code tools and there's some security flaw, like that is the worst user experience you can have. At that point, nobody cares if the border radius buttons are consistent, right? You've just lost trust in that. So I think really, the thing I wanted to add is scale thoughtfully and think about the threshold of like, this can work for now, but when do we need to kind of like, flip the engine and make that change?
I think that's very insightful. And like Dana said, I really love saying, hey, let's use principles we're already using in the world of coding to try to preserve that kind of quality. And I want to continue with what you said about security, David. So I want to ask maybe specifically about concerns with using third-party apps or plugins. So you're saying try to be as smart as you can and make all the processes as good as you can. But what happens when you use external resources that you don't really know what control you have for the security? What are the risks there, and what can be done to kind of help with it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of risk, right? Before Webflow, I was at One Medical, which talk about a very regulated place where security is super important. I treat it the same way. And I think that, the same way no code is developer friendly, we want it to be InfoSec friendly too, because there's a lot of challenges and we need like the smartest people in security to help us figure it out. Like my approach is just really offer up transparency and intention of like where you want to be using these things, because again, there's a lot of unintended consequences. So really think about like what Dana said, just really practice the same principles that you have in any other way of developing software, right? It's just really vetting these things and seeing like, okay, is this a workflow that there's like little to low risk in this, or is this a high risk area? And just really collaborating, working with IT and security on what those things are.
Well, it's a great point, and I think transparency is a very insightful thing to look as a measurement to understand what you're handling with and what you're dealing with. So okay, we talked about benefits and we talked about risks. So I have like the ways to weigh pros and cons. Let's say I decided to use a no-code solution. How do I even go and decide what I wanted to consider when choosing the right tool for the job? So Catherine, maybe you have some insights as part of the process you're doing with no code.
Yeah, I would first make sure that it's going to solve the problem you have and not do the thing you want it to do, if that makes sense. I think a lot of times, a lot of no code solutions are very slick, and because they're so easy to get started with, you maybe rush to try and do it, try and get it implemented, and then you're in a spot where you find yourself making those custom templates and getting yourself into that low code zone, which maybe isn't a bad thing, but at the front, you could have done a little bit more problem thinking, and seeing if what you were getting out of the box is really going to solve your problem, or if maybe there is something else out there that could maybe be a little bit more specific. And that's not a bad thing, right? If you have to go low code at some point, but I think being realistic at the front of like what the expectations are for the engineering team, and again, creating that life cycle of good change management principles and policies at the beginning is very important. And then I think I would also sit down with the people that are going to be using this day to day. I think it's really easy to pick a no-code solution and assume that everyone's going to be really excited about it. I think most people are really excited at the chance to have more agency and own their own destiny. But some might feel like this is a lot for me to handle. This is a lot of responsibility. So I think kind of going into it without their input is usually not the way to go. So those would be my recommendations. Make sure the problem's solved by this. If it's not totally solved, make sure you have an engineering plan for how to implement and maintain this long term, and make sure you're getting the input of the people that are going to be using the tool day to day.
Cool. So I'm hearing consider everyone on the team, and I also heard, if I got this correctly, try to think of value and not the short term, what I want to do tomorrow. And kind of like it gives you a lot of velocity. So when you put the pedal to the floor, make sure the steering wheel is on the right position, if I get what you're saying.
Yes.
And Dana, what do you think? What just considerations from the sides of developers who work with people who use the no code? Would there be consideration you would like them to take into account?
That they own it. I mean, like from a developer standpoint, it's like, oh, come on, think about what you're doing before you like go do something like not out of the box, because we're busy too. No, but I think it just comes down to, I'm not a designer. Dave will love this. Use design thinking. That's basically what Catherine's saying. Like, solve for the long term, right?
In the most polite way possible.
Right. Like, it is so polite, right? Like, I need you to use some design thinking about how you want the tool to be. Maybe, but it gets so fast. I think we're just under this immense amount of pressure. And like, I think humans naturally want to do the best. Like, I'm a chronic insecure overachiever. And I think a lot of people that are makers and builders in our space are the exact same, at least in some way, because like you want your babies out in the world. And so you got to just make sure that it's done right and done thoughtfully, and it's done for the right purpose. And you're not, doing something because of the pressure to get it done. It's really taking a breath and finding that balance. And then also like the whole like life cycle, it's hard to sit and say, what's your 3-year strategic plan when everything is so freaking unpredictable in the world right now. But I encourage people like sit there and think of long-term, that scalability, like that support cycle, like, because you have to be fiscally minded. You may go and say, I'm gonna purchase this for 12 months because it's gonna save X. Like at the end of the day, that's probably one of the biggest reasons like you make these trade-offs for a lot of companies, is because it comes down to dollars and cents. Does it cost more money for me to have a whole engineering team with a support life cycle and my own IP to build whatever? Or do I buy this product that's already been built and I have people have a non-development background be able to do it, which will probably be a little bit more cost effective in some ways, but you can offset those costs by building the wrong shit. And so like, it's really this deep thinking. And that's why I come back to, let's apply some design thinking when we make a solution choice and start there instead of like the speed. Don't start at the speed. Don't start at how much it costs. Start at the problem. And it's hard to pull yourself back when you just want to go. At least for me, I'll say that for me.
I love it. That's why I called you the Justice League, because we have a developer talking about design thinking. That's priceless. I really like it.
What's funny is I was going to say, like, I feel like we're doing musical chairs, because what I was going to say is like, you should think like a product manager, because I think really what you need to think about is like kind of what the jobs to be done are. Yeah. Like, is this something someone can use? Like, what's that intention you want? Because there is a such thing as overbuilding and over architecting for something you don't need. And every decision is going to be a cost. I was a little nervous because I was wondering if Guy was going to say, like, should people use Editor X or Webflow, right? And it's really about like what that use case is, right? So my suggestion is you start even before you make the purchase, right? There's free trials for all these things. Really find a way where you can put a proof of concept together and test it out. So Dana's telling you to do design thinking, and I'm like, think like a product manager and really nail those jobs to be done.
Okay, so now it's Catherine's turn to tell everyone to do as a prototyper does. No, I'm just kidding.
There you go.
So David, I want to ask you something as, again, from the design perspective of someone who actually works in a platform for no code. So I want to talk about simplicity versus capabilities. I feel like there's always the tension there. And speaking for experience in Editor X, when we, for example, try to work on packaging CSS Grid and Flexbox and shipping them as something very powerful like they do, but also very manageable and easy to use, we were trying to be very focused on this thin line. So I'm really interested to hear, how do you handle this and how do you approach that kind of tension?
Oh man, we're still figuring it out, right? It's a tough problem because everyone has different needs. There's different mental models. I thought when I was going from, building my own HTML and CSS sites, I'm going to stop kind of having this paradox of choice of what CSS framework I'm going to use and just go into no code tools. And, for us at Webflow, like it can be very complex, and that's the thing. There's a lot of power that it offers, but not everyone needs that power, and everyone's coming from different ways of learning, right? So if you have a front end dev background, it's probably very comfortable in that regard. But if you're a designer who may be non-technical or just anyone kind of building up a site, it can be challenging. So I think for us, it's just really understanding like what that progressive power is. So how does someone kind of get started and continue to learn and master the tool itself if they even need to, right? So I think we're kind of exploring it on like, what are some like elegant affordances we can add for people where if you need that customization, it's still available. So you're not capping that power and taking it away. We don't ever want to take away the power from people. So it's very much a UX problem that we're trying to solve. And, we've been doing a lot of prototyping work and understanding around this, but it's tough because there's different personas. And as we continue to grow, there's going to be different needs. But what we've kind of been leaning on is that progressive power and understand like where areas we can simplify without completely removing things.
So it's a great answer. And I do want to still kind of challenge you because I also saw a question from our people watching. Gary asked about, he stated and asked that he wants to sometimes create very advanced animations, for example, or interactions. And he's wondering if the tools are able to create those kind of things and actually do the same thing that raw code, let's call it raw code, can do. But my question from that is, do you think putting the ability to code in addition inside the no code, low code platform, is that a solution you favor for, you try to avoid? And will we always have the option to code? Is it something that will never disappear and stay there?
Yeah, let me kind of think of my principle for it is I think extensibility is important, right? Forever, like whatever extensibility means, like years from now too. So like no code, you still want to be able to extend to code. So it's really having abstractions important, but also like raw output, I believe is always important. So like, again, I don't think we'd ever want to take that away. I think there's a question on like, how much should that native offering be available for people to do it? And then what are the use cases where you need to do something sophisticated, right? So I don't know what type of animation this would be, but let's say if it's something that is, really complex and it's visualizations that you have to do with code, right? Like, I don't like, we'd have to kind of decide what that trade-off is. But I do think like, regardless of how sophisticated no code gets, that concept of extensibility is always going to be crucial into whatever that next technology will be.
Okay, so I want to bring it back to Dana and ask, again, regarding to what we just discussed, the place where no code and code actually meet. What difficulties do you find there, and how do you see it growing in the future for something that we want to include everyone, not the no coders only or the developers or curly bracket people only in a different separate tool? How do you see it?
I swear we did not plan this very well, but I'm going to say it is about extensibility, right? Like having the ability to create, again, a modular, I don't want to say an extensible whole like output, but I implore these platforms out there to have an ecosystem, make it a way to have an SDK or another opportunity to have these extensible pieces so you can have that feature set that you need. But you know, you're going to build to the 80%. Like you got 10% that are always going to love you and be like, this is the best thing. I don't need anything. It's amazing. You're going to have the 10% that think it sucks and that no code, low code stupid and everything should be done from Vim and forget about that. GUIs are for losers. There's always going to be that subset too. But the 80% are going to see this opportunity of going like, wait a minute, we're innovating. This is human form at its finest. You know, why not embrace it? Why not have this amazing platform that continues to lower the barrier, right? Being a developer should not be sacred. Because you know what? The world is driven by technology and that's our future. People, we all need to embrace it. If everything around you right now was built with some form of software, I'm saying like, yes, let's continue to do it. Let's continue to make it where there's advanced notions. And for the developers out there, guess what? You're the one that's getting to be able to do this for people. You still have to go and program the low code, no code platforms. You still have to make the machine learning models. We're not there yet. We all don't have jetpacks yet, but when we do, we'll be worried about the next thing. And Elon Musk has already done it. So I'm going to tell you, I just want us to think about the ecosystem and create right. And as a place that really hopes that everybody is a developer, even though it shouldn't be sacred, right? That the people that are super curious, get in there and start contributing to these projects. Go do some open source, go find a mentor, go learn how it works. If you are that into it, take the next step. There's a million resources at your hands. Like go embrace that techie nerd part of you beyond the thing that you're building. So for me as a developer, I'm like, heck yeah, this is going to get more people interested into our careers. This is going to get those kids that didn't think they could be developers thinking about, I wonder how this works, because we're all tinkerers, every one of us.
Nice. That's a very powerful statement. You are sounding like a superhero. I think that from all this conversation, what comes up is that no code, again, we see it as two opposing kind of dichotomy of two opposing forces that are pit against each other. And I think we're understanding that it doesn't have to be that way and it shouldn't be that way. So I think we also see that these two forces, they sometimes interact, they sometimes overlap, and they even should coexist. So I think it's very interesting and something that rises me as a question, and I want to leave it with you guys watching as an open question. For you guys who are developers, what are our responsibilities in the no-code world? And for you guys who are no-coders, what are our responsibilities? How can we make this kind of a synergetic process that involves all of the people together? And I think the biggest question is, if you would imagine how the no-code world will be in the future, thinking that it should coexist with the coders and no coders, how do you imagine it? Where do you think it should go? You can comment or write us. We'd love to see what you've been writing. Well, and for you. And so thank you guys. I just wanted to finish up and say thank you for your participation and insights. I loved talking to you guys, and I'm really happy to hear all of the things you had to say. And I'm gonna bring it back to Rory. So thank you guys.